The anesthesiologists have also said, if you want to know if somebody's struggling, look at the motion in their fingers, because it's where we have the most motor control. And so it's the last place that becomes paralyzed that you could see. And so they're like, if someone's really struggling inside, but they're becoming paralyzed, look for motion in the fingers. And now we see the worst states, e.g. Florida. You know what they do now? They tape down their fingers.
This is Courtroom Stories and Tactics by RVA Trial Lawyers, hosted by Sharif Gray and Niall Abuzaki.
All right, before we get into today's episode, I want to take a minute and thank Maximum Medical Improvement Partners, MMI, for supporting the podcast. As many of our listeners know, one of the biggest drivers of case value for our clients isn't just proving liability, but it's whether the client actually gets the right medical care and recovers from their injuries the right way. As we all know, when their treatment is delayed or incomplete, their cases lose value, and Maximum Medical Improvement Partners helps solve that problem.
You're right, Sharif. My name is Dr. Scott Dickey, and I'm with MMI Partners. Our mission is to connect injured clients with the right clinicians and quarterback the client's medical care from day one, leading to stronger recovery, clearer documentation, and increased case value.
Thanks, Scott. For our listeners who are interested in getting in touch with you all, how can they find you?
You can visit us at nmi.partners. Again, that's nmi.partners.
We have a very special guest with us today. Corinna Lain, Professor Lain, welcome to our podcast. And I'll tell you, it started early this morning when I received a text from Sharif saying, Niall, we're going to have an amazing podcast episode today. And both Sharif and I have been looking forward to this episode. So, Professor Lain, you're an author, you've published a book recently, but what's important also is that you are the George Allen Chair in Law at the University of Richmond. And that is an honor for professors that began back sometime in 1982. And there's only some professors that are chaired, and you're one of those professors. But before we get into that, why don't you tell the listeners a bit about you, who you are as a human?
Okay, thanks so much for having me. It's really an honor. I've been looking forward to this all day.
So hey, we have something in common here. Yep. That's right. In today's episode.
I was listening to the book too today, and I was like, this is good.
So I am originally from Montana, and
I've seen the TV show Yellowstone.
oh, you have? I mean, it's
I know,
like that.
I know it all.
You know, when my husband first came out and we were dating, and I brought him home, he came out to Montana, and he literally said, "Poverty with a view," and that, you know, I still remember that. It's true. It's absolutely beautiful. I am the oldest of three, of a single mom. My dad was a mechanic. My mom was a secretary and then a card dealer. In Montana, gambling is legal, and then became a teacher. But, you know, a single mom of three, you know, we moved around a lot. And so for me, I was thinking about college. I really wanted to go to college. I would have been a first gen, you know, at the time. And I joined the Army at 18. And I did not ask my parents. I joined the Army, and then I told them that I did. And I joined for the GI Bill.
And there's a smile. As soon as you said you joined the Army, I'm looking at Sharif, and the smile just kind of...
Did it?
Yeah.
Couldn't help myself?
Yeah.
You chose the right branch.
Well, there you go.
Where were you stationed?
I did. So I was in Darmstadt, Germany,
terrible.
with the 94th Engineer Battalion, Combat Heavy, 18th Engineer Brigade. And then I was in Savannah, Georgia, with at Hunter Army Airfield.
That's where I was. So
Really?
I was at Fort Stewart. Uh-huh. But actually, funny enough, my wife and I ended up getting married at Forsyth Park in Savannah.
Wow.
So
I
we
was
have
just there.
We have a special place in our heart for Savannah. Beautiful, beautiful city.
Such a beautiful city. Oh, that's so sweet. So yeah, I mean, I joined for the GI Bill, and you know, for me, I'm like, I had not been east of North Dakota. So I was pretty sure there was a big bad world out there, and I really wanted a piece of it. So I didn't really care what I did. And you can get bonuses if you join for certain things that the Army needs. And one of the things that the Army needed was truck drivers. And
Look at
so I joined as a 64 Charlie, which was a truck driver. They later changed the MOS name to 88 Mike, but I was a truck driver in the Army, and that is how I got my start.
From 64 Charlie to professor of 26, 27 years at University of Richmond School of Law. So got out of the Army. What led you to law school?
Yeah. So I met a man in Savannah, Georgia, out playing pool one night. And he was in the JAG Corps. So, I and my girlfriends, we knew that they were military guys by their haircut. They didn't know that we were military, but we played pool, and I thought he was cute. And
All Army Jags.
Jag
right?
guys,
Like, I'm sorry.
All Army
but-
Jags are super cute. I agree.
But I was a sergeant by then. And by the way, I have mentioned from time to my students, I'm like, just so you know, not only was I a truck driver in the Army and a sergeant and a squad leader, but I was qualified expert with the M16A1 semi-automatic rifle. They just kind of look at me like, what? Who are you? But it's really fun. But anyway, I, met a fellow, and we started dating and fell in love. And he was from Mechanicsville, Virginia.
From the boonies.
And so his
Poverty without a view. No, I'm joking.
exactly.
Without a view.
Well,
I'm joking.
There's
circle.
something to that.
Full circle.
But he got out right before I did. His name was Jim Tate. Some people around town might still know him. He became a public defender in Richmond City. So he came out and was a public defender. And his pitch to me was, Richmond, Virginia in general, they have great schools. And, if you went out here to school, then we could give it a chance and, see if it works out. And if not, you're going to get a great education. So I thought that was a good idea. And so I came out here and went to William and Mary undergrad and was, with Jim that whole time. And a sad little part of the story is we did get engaged and we bought a house on North Side. But he got sick and died of cancer. And so that was, a really rough part of my story. But you ask why I went to law school. So here I am in college, and, I'm with this wonderful, amazing man. And, the people that we went out with were the public defenders. And I'm hearing all the stories and, all of the things. And I thought, that's a pretty cool job. So I wanted to go to law school. I wasn't sure that I wanted to be a public defender, but I thought maybe I did. So I had gotten into law school when Jim got his diagnosis. I asked for a deferral for a year from places that I was accepted, and they all said yes. And so I deferred for a year, and that whole situation played out such that when I went to UVA in the fall of '93, I thought, I might just pick up where Jim left off. I think I'm going to be a public defender. Like, I'm going to do that work. And the summer after my first year, I spent most of that time, I think it was 8 weeks at Hunt and Williams, but that paid for 3 weeks at the Richmond Public Defender's Office. And I just called Dave Johnson, who was the public defender at the time in Richmond, and said, and I knew him through Jim, and said, hey, can I come hang out with you all? And he said, sure. And I spent that little 3 weeks and realized it takes a very special person to be a defender. And I'm just not that special, or I'm not that special in that way. And so I was like, yeah, I'm not going to be a defender. But I loved the criminal law. I loved it. I mean, it's the most interesting, I think. And it's so important. People aren't fighting over money. They're talking about like liberty and life
and liberty.
Right? Yeah. All of those things.
Constitution. I mean, it's...
Right. So I wasn't sure. I remember thinking like, I don't know that I could be a prosecutor. But I wanted to give it a shot. And by the time I kind of figured that out, I was a 3L. And it was almost graduation time. So I spent three weeks with Enrico. And in that time said, yeah, I want to be a prosecutor. And that's how that happened.
So we have that in common.
Yeah, we've got a lot of
Yeah, I
common.
was going to say, right?
We all three of
Yeah.
us prosecuted in Henrico County Commonwealth Attorney's
Crazy.
Office.
I know.
How long
Crazy.
were you in Henrico for?
It was like 3 years, 8 months,
And-
just short of 4 years.
And Corinna, we often say that if you have a great prosecutor, you don't really need a defense attorney because the prosecutor's job is not to convict; it's
There you go.
to be a minister of justice.
Yes,
And justice can take on many forms, which is dismissing a charge, providing services for someone that needs services. If they need evaluations for substance use, mental health, whatever it is, you can do it, right?
Yeah.
And that's your job. Your job is not to convict. Your job is not to simply lock up.
I love that you said that
And you know, it's
because it can get lost.
it can get lost. And
Yeah.
the reason why I do say it is because there are a lot of prosecutors that I know that say, hey, we listen to your podcast, and I know they're going to be listening. And when they see that, you know, Corinna Lain is going to be on this particular episode, that it's important. It's a reminder. It's a reminder that your job is not just simply to convict.
It's not to win.
It's not. And, you know, winning, I always hated the word winning from a prosecutor. You don't win. It's never a win. It's never a win because you still have someone that's been victimized, and you have someone that's been victimized through life's circumstances.
Absolutely.
And that's why they're victimizing others, because they just don't know better.
That is
So-
beautiful. You know, there in the law school right now, the vibe I think is very much the students are very interested in criminal defense, less so in prosecution. I mean, there are some, but the vibe is really sort of on one side, and I think they see excesses of the government in different places and are like, you know, I'm going to be a defender. And I'm always saying to groups or in class, don't demonize those prosecutors, because I got to tell you, they have all the power. And you want good people. You want people who are not thinking about it as a win, but who are thinking about it as like, you know, I've got this discretion to do the right thing. And so I love this.
It's good to hear that, especially because my understanding is that the criminal defense bar, there just aren't that many young lawyers, at least in Richmond. I mean, of course, the VIDC, the public defender's offices, has tons of young lawyers, but there is a real gap in the private side when it comes to young lawyers on the defense side. And we've got some amazing criminal defense lawyers in Richmond, but they're all close to retirement. And so it is encouraging to hear that. But then to your point, I mean, as we had Commonwealth attorney from Charlottesville, Joe Platania, on, and I remember him telling us a story about how just with the strike of a pen, the stroke of a pen, right, he can make something right. Whereas for a public defender or a criminal defense attorney, it can be an uphill battle depending on who you have on the other side.
Sharif, if you strike violent felony, 2 words, you go from 5 years mandatory minimum to no time if it's greater than 10 years as a prosecutor. Simply a strike of violent felony. The word violent, you strike violent and just felony, 5 years disappeared. So within a strike of a pen, you can strike 5 years and give someone back 5 years of life. And if they cannot appreciate the power of that stroke, then they shouldn't be prosecutors.
That's
then
good.
they shouldn't be prosecutors. So
That's good stuff.
well, let's talk about.
There's so much to talk about.
No.
I know.
I mean,
So much to talk.
let's talk about the secrets of the killing state.
Okay.
Tell us, how did that come about? What is it?
So Secrets of the Killing State, The Untold Story of Lethal Injection is my first book. I'm kind of hoping it's my last book. I'm hoping it's my only book because it was really a thing. But that book is the product of 7 years of deep research into lethal injection around the country. And, I'll just tell you, this project started, I'm a death penalty scholar. I'm a legal historian and a death penalty scholar. So I look at those are my two kind of deep veins of research. And so I've been working in the death penalty space for a while. Actually, very interestingly, and as a segue from what we were just talking about, as a legal historian, I did a piece on the death penalty on Furman versus Georgia, which abolished the death penalty as it then existed in 1972. Gregg versus Georgia, which brought it back in 76. And then I did another legal history piece. And as I was looking at that, I came across this decision from Texas, the Burdine case. You may have heard of it, where the lawyer fell asleep. The defense attorney fell asleep during the capital trial. And, he didn't say, it looked like my eyes were asleep. I was looking down, or yes, they were closed, but I was concentrating. He said, I did fall asleep, but it wasn't during an important part. And I remember, thinking as a prosecutor, it's all an important part. You're on trial for your life. And, this was a 2001 case. The law has moved since then. But at the time, the trial court, there's a line in the trial court's opinion. My students still read it every year. But the trial court said, the Constitution says you're entitled to an attorney. It doesn't say they have to be awake. And it was in that moment as a prosecutor or former prosecutor at the time, where I thought, good people on both sides of the aisle would think that's crazy, would say, well, if we're going to kill somebody, we can't have sleeping lawyers. We can't have prosecutors hiding evidence. We can't, there are certain things that we should always get those things right, but this is really important. So that's what got me into the death penalty in the first place. And then as to this project, I just had a research question. That's just what I do. I'm a researcher. And my question was, why are states so bad at lethal injection? I was just seeing in the papers as a death penalty researcher, I'm, keeping an eye on what's going on. And I'm thinking, why am I seeing a 3-hour-long execution? Why am I seeing 2-hour-long executions? Why am I seeing someone waking up in the middle of their execution and trying to get off the gurney? Why am I seeing autopsies with 16 and 18 puncture wounds? We know how to put down our beloved pets. We know how physician-assisted suicide works. So why are states so breathtakingly bad at executions by lethal injection? That was literally my question. I set out to, first I tried to find research that explained it. I couldn't find any. And then I was actually talking to a friend who's done some research on lethal injection. And I asked him, Eric Berger at Nebraska, and I said, Eric, who's done this? I can't find the answer. This is so weird. And he said, yeah, nobody's written it. You ought to do it. And I literally I remember this was a conference in Florida. I sat out there on that veranda with my little margarita on the rocks and said, I don't want to be the lethal injection girl.
Here we are.
You're not
So
exactly.
you see how that worked
How
out.
bad are the states when it comes to lethal injection?
It's really, really bad. I learned so much. I think I have a pretty healthy view of the shortcuts that are made to make the death penalty work. And I was shocked at what I found. The original 3-drug protocol, the 3 drugs, we could talk about it, but I think the important thing to know is the middle drug, the second drug, is a paralytic. And it's not just a paralytic, but it's a muscle relaxant. And so it relaxes the muscles in the face, and then it freezes them that way. So you're going to get this really nice drifting off to sleep look, no matter what is actually happening. And we now have a couple hundred autopsies that show us what is actually happening. And, interestingly, the early studies, the scientists started poking around because this thing wasn't based on science. So they're like, I don't know how you can make those claims. Let's see. Let me get some information. And Virginia and Texas refused, the 2 most executing states at the time, refused to share their data. Sorry, can't have it. And then Texas's next move was, we're just not going to conduct autopsies at all. And when they were asked by the media, why are you not doing autopsies anymore? They said, we know how they died. So it was very interesting to me that when the scientists started snooping around, they just stopped creating the data. But we've got the data now, and we know what's happening now. And The anesthesiologists have also said, even before the paralytic, as it's taking place, if you want to know if somebody's struggling, look at the motion in their fingers, because it's where we have the most motor control. And so it's the last place. You retain the control. It's the last place that becomes paralyzed. Well, really the last place is the core, but that you could see. And so they're like, if someone's really struggling inside, but they're becoming paralyzed, look for motion in the fingers. And now we see the worst states, e.g. Florida. You know what they do now? They tape down their fingers. They tape down their fingers. They're already in wrist restraints. There's no reason whatsoever, except for people are starting to look and they're moving their fingers. And so we'll take care of that.
Corinna, you talk about there was no science behind this. We're in the greatest country on earth, arguably, and I believe so. And no one looked into this compound that we're injecting people with when the state is making a decision to take someone's life.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy, right? I also was like, what? So there are two moments in time to think about. One is 1890. In 1890, there had been some botched executions by hanging. And the state of New York put together this commission to find an alternative to hanging. Now, that 1890 report actually ended up recommending the electric chair. So that's how we got the electric chairs, because of this report. But importantly, for our purposes, they looked at what we now call lethal injection. That was one of the things that they said, well, what about an injection of something that would make the person die? And they recommended against it for two reasons, both of which have come to pass. But the first, they said, is what they called anatomical difficulties. These people, the death row population has notoriously bad veins. These are people who are a geriatric population. They have histories of poor health. Lots of them were former IV drug users. So it's very interesting to me that in 1890, they were like, yeah, these people have bad veins. This is not going to work very well. The other reason was the sustained opposition of the medical community. And they said, yeah, we're not going to be able to do this well if we don't have the medical community on board. So in 1890, when they did study it, they said, yeah, this is a super bad idea. It's never going to work. We're not doing it. Fast forward to 1977, which is when the first state adopted lethal injection. In that context, it was Oklahoma. And, the Supreme Court had brought back the death penalty. I think historical context is important here. Supreme Court had brought back the death penalty in 76. The country had not seen an execution, aside from Gary Gilmore, let's do it, but had not seen an execution in 10 years. Legislators were like, I'm not sure that the country has, the stomach to see that sort of state violence. And what I found is a federal court in Texas had recognized a First Amendment right to televise executions. Now, it wouldn't last, but nobody could have known that. But what I found in the legislative history was these legislators were like, this is not going to work. We can't have an electric, like one of them said, we can't have an electric chair in someone's living room.
Right.
This is a brand new death penalty. They haven't seen an execution in 10 years. They're not going to be ready for that kind of state violence. And we haven't had an execution in 10 years. Nobody's missed it. If we care about this death penalty, we got to find a different way. So they start asking in Oklahoma, they asked their personal doctors, legislators did. They asked the State Medical Association. Nobody wants to play. So they turn to the state medical examiner, a guy named Dr. J. Chapman. He calls himself, I found an interview, he calls himself an expert in dead bodies, but not an expert in how to get them that way. He says, I'll help. And he comes up with a 3-drug protocol. And in a later interview, they said, well, how did you come up with a 3-drug protocol? Not one of those drugs is what we use for animal euthanasia. Not one. So like, how did you even come up with that? And he literally said, I didn't do any research. I just thought about what might work. You wanted 2 drugs so that if one didn't kill him, the other one did. And then the interviewer said, well, why did you add a 3rd drug? And he said, why not? Why does it matter why I chose it? I didn't do any research. So that's how we got here.
What's mind blowing is that in law school, we would hear about certain cases where before someone is executed, they're suffering from either a heart attack or some other, if they have an issue where they go get treated for that issue before then they come back and they're executed. Little do we know that natural cause would have been a way easier cause for them to leave this world.
Yeah, true.
Can we talk about, and I recognize this was not the subject of your book,
It's all good.
the competing interests when it comes to just the morality of having a death penalty?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to talk about that.
What are they?
Well, I think there's real interests, and I think I don't want to say feigned interests, but I think there's misunderstood interests. So when I think about the real interests, I think about retribution. I think about deterrence. The research is super clear that the death penalty does not deter. Like the National Academy of Scientists came out with a report, I don't know, maybe it was 10 years ago, and they said, just stop saying that studies show that, because they don't. Just stop saying that. If you want to argue, I think it would deter because because people are rational human beings, go ahead and make that argument. But don't say the studies back you up, because they don't.
Right. And also it doesn't make sense because life in prison has that much less of a deterrence effect than death, right? It doesn't. And then it's the whole concept. Remember we had Jeff Everhart on here a while back?
Yeah.
It's not like the public sitting there watching what happens in Henrico GDC every day and be like, oh, yikes, I'm not going to speed today because that judge gave that person this fine, right? Like, it's not to say that deterrence isn't a valid sentencing consideration. It certainly is, but I think it may be used a little bit too much. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, we presume that people, when they're acting, and when they're acting as committing a crime, they're thinking of the punishment right then and there, and that's and people don't usually think of that. In court, I'm judging emotions, emotions on a bad day that were not controlled. And when you're not thinking with sound mind and logic, your emotions are taken over and you can't reel it back, which leads you to do what you regret doing. And now you're facing punishment for in court, right?
So retribution,
So that's
deterrence.
Well, and I think one other thing that we should say about deterrence before we move on is it's an important data point, at least to me, that about a third, it depends on the year, but about a third of the people we execute every year have been diagnosed with severe mental illness under the DSM-5. Like, these are people truly that are psychotic, and it doesn't mean that they're not competent to stand trial. I've written about this. How can this possibly be? And it doesn't mean that they're not competent to be executed. So, you got people, there was one case, this is Texas again, where this is Peretti. He goes to court in a purple cowboy uniform. He subpoenas Jesus Christ and the Pope, and
Did they
it's
show
like,
up?
In my piece, I drop a footnote and say, he didn't know. He was always there with you, but,
The subpoena worked. They served it. No, I'm
right.
joking.
But I'm just saying it assumes something. And these people who generally do these crimes, I think 2/3 of them, a good 2/3, I think a third of them are severely mentally ill, full stop. Deterrence assumes rational thinking. by definition, they are not rational thinkers.
Begin.
The other, I don't know, 40%, maybe 50, I don't know. But they have been through extreme brutalization in their childhood. And generally, they are self-medicating. And what happens is you get somebody who's got this rage inside. And then, they get on meth or PCP or, crack, and they're a powder keg. They are. It's just trauma and rage. They've never been treated for it. And that's where you see that overkill. That's where you see so many of these things. I mean, that was Ricky Gray's story, if you ever want to talk about that. But, that is the story of Ricky Gray that I never knew. I remember being a prosecutor or being a new law professor thinking like, okay, that guy though, he killed a whole family and, all this stuff. And you go back and it's like, yeah, he was, started being sodomized at 4 and 5. They kept him out of school because he was bleeding through his pants. And he was the son of a sex worker. He was traded out. He was addicted to PCP at 11. And the guy the criminal psychologist who evaluated him said, I've evaluated, I think it was over 100 people convicted of murder. And he said, I have never seen a case as bad as Ricky Gray of what he'd been through. So, there's within the criminal psychology literature, they say the worse the brutalization, the worse the violentization, that you're going to see. So anyway, all of that is just to say none of those people, not the mentally ill, not those that are strung out on drugs and just have rage, they're not thinking, gee, and if they are, it's not like they're saying, I could do life in prison. That sounds all right to me.
Let me not pull the trigger right now.
You know? But so that's not happening. And if you look at the Gallup polls for people who do support the death penalty, the number one reason, it's not deterrence, it's retribution. Like that's what this death penalty is
and
about.
to be fair, actually, in thinking on this today, I was like, you know what? Like, if someone took a loved one of mine,
you bet.
I can't. I don't know. I don't want to even imagine how I would feel. I don't know how I would process that, but I can guarantee there would be a part of me that wants that retribution.
Absolutely.
And you know what? But then I would also hope that there's also another part of me, the former criminal defense lawyer, the former prosecutor, the person who at least hopes that we're trying to at least move the ball forward, right? In all parts when it comes to these very difficult issues, that that may not be the right solution, the death penalty, in the sense that, what if there is a mistake? Well, that's an irreversible error, right? You can't go back, right? What does that say about the government? Someone kills and we kill in return. It's a very complicated issue. And frankly, I don't even know where I personally fall.
So one of the things that I learned both from the book tour and which we should talk about that.
I want to hear the book tour.
Well, I'll give you the stats, but then I do want to tell you, because I talked to family members of slain victims. They came to some of my events. And so I really learned a lot from just being on the road. So being on the road, I did take a professional leave in the fall semester. And we did 57 events in just under 80 days. We, as in my sister, she drove every mile, and it was a little over 13,000 miles across 23 states.
Amazing.
35 cities. So, it was a driving tour. And, those 57 events, that doesn't include the coffees that I had with students or with other, with various stakeholders, or, lunches or dinners or, or beverages, other things. I met a lot of people, and that was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. But, just to go back, all of the things you said are true. Here's a thing I didn't think about that I now can't get out of my mind. One of the things I heard again and again from victims' family members, and obviously I'm not speaking for, anyone listening out there, I'm the last person, I'm not trying to speak for anyone, but a thing that I heard again and again was, they told us it would bring us closure. And the opposite is what happened. They, in fact, I feel so strongly about this. I'm have on my list to write a law review recommending warnings to victims' family members. But what they said was, it was the opposite of closure. If we were telling them the truth, what we would say is this: you just lost the most dearest person in your life, perhaps in some, brutal, terrible manner, and you're reeling from that. And now we're going to take a couple decades of your life, and you will not move on. You will be standing still waiting for those appeals. You're going to know every appeal. You're going to know every parole board. You're going to know every time they go to the infirmary. Your whole life is just going to stop and wait for this thing. And it's the average time between sentence and execution is 21 years. So we're looking at maybe 2 decades of your life. And you need to know somewhere between half and 2/3 of all death sentences are reversed on appeal. So it could very well be for nothing, for the same thing they were willing to plead out to. And you need to know this other piece too, that if you are to be so fortunate as to get the execution that you've been waiting for, you need to know there's a really good chance that the person who committed those terrible crimes is just not there anymore. That person died inside a long time ago. And be prepared, because the prison guards may cry, are going to feel bad for that person. And that is going to be its own huge, it's like, what? You're feeling sorry for them? Well, yeah, because they're 70 years old and I'm wheeling them in on a wheelchair. Or they've become a born-again Christian. And here's a thing that happened in Alabama, and then I'll, pause. But, I'm driving through Alabama. This summer, Alabama executed a guy who was on death row for 27 years. Found faith. Terrible murders. Let's just own that, right? Found faith, started the Church of Death Row for death row. Alabama gassed him. And when that happened, I don't know any of these players, by the way. I don't know any of these people. But the prison chaplain came out and said to the media, scarcely have I experienced such holiness in my life as that man. And that man was bringing people to faith that nobody else could touch. It took somebody saying, I know the depths of self-hatred, and let me tell you about, you can't out-sin this grace I'm going to tell you about. And so, I saw that all over the place. And so what do we do with that? What do we do with that piece? I think of the victims all the time because we're former prosecutors. Of course we do. Right. Or the victims' family members of victims.
Can you talk about what, if any, impact you saw to the guards?
Oh, yes. And I write about it. It's in the book. So what the guards say is, there's a main narrative and then there's a little side thing that's kind of worse. But, the main thing they say is, by the time a death warrant comes down, we've been living with this person for a couple decades. And we know they're not the same person that they were. And we've gotten to know them as a human being. And then we have to kill them. And one of them even said, and they're defenseless when they come in, and they're not the same person, and you can't expect that there won't be an effect from that. And so I document, divorce, drug addiction, depression, suicidal thoughts. It's all there. And then, there's this other guy that I also quote in the book who says, yeah, it was really hard at first, but now it ain't no different than getting a beer out of the fridge. And so, what I want to say to the state is, tell me which of these is okay with you. Tell me which of these is okay. And in the epilogue of the book, I write about this fellow. Missouri executed him. But, I have a Google News alert, and this news alert comes across my desk. The guy's name is Brian Dorsey. And it's an op-ed written by the guards saying, we know he's changed, don't kill him. And they had written a petition, and now they turned it into an op-ed to take it public. And they said, this guy has been on death row for 17 years. He lives in the honor dorm. I don't know quite how you get to the honor dorm as contempt, but he did. And he's the prison barber. And what they said about this Brian Dorsey, they said, he not only cuts the hair of all the other prisoners, but by choice of all the prison guards, including the 2 wardens. So imagine what that looked like, a condemned capital murderer with a pair of scissors and a razor blade at the warden's neck again and again.
It's interesting you say all that.
It's wild.
Started prosecution, made it down to death row, and spoke to a number of inmates that were on death row. And some of the nicest humans that I met were the ones that were on death row, and then some of the ones that were not so nice and wanted to prove themselves are those that were serving 7 to 10 year sentence. And it was interesting, and you hear it also from the guards as well. You hear it from the guards as well, and you talk about the trauma to the guards. As a prosecutor, you can't shake the smell of formaldehyde from my nose after going to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. And every time I take the exit right next to the Coliseum, I'm driving right before I get to the Coliseum, and I drive by the medical examiner's office, it takes me back to the times that I used to go. And granted, they're dead. They're gone already. You're just there for the autopsy. So I can't imagine them witnessing someone be executed.
Why isn't there as much scrutiny on this issue? And when I say this issue, just executions in general, and then also specifically what you studied, the lethal injections. My guess, and I could be wrong, but I tend to believe, at least when I did criminal defense, what I eventually came to learn is that people don't really care about like the right to remain silent, for example, or some of these constitutional rights until it touches them or until it touches a loved one. And then on the same thought, I'm going to do almost exclusively now plaintiff's injury work. And it's the same thing. Oh, those ambulance chasers. But when it touches you, when it touches a loved one and you're dealing with the insurance company and they're trying to offer you $500, but you can't play with your kid anymore, right? Like then you realize these things have merit. Is that it? Is it that the people who are ultimately advocating for and making legislation that dictates the death penalty and the manner in which we execute that death penalty, is that they just don't see it? It doesn't touch them, and that everyone else, we're just so far removed that it's not even a part of our consciousness? Is that it?
I think it's a little complicated, and I will say that although my research started with the question of like why are they so bad at this, at some point in that period it changed. My question changed, and my question was, why are states sticking with lethal injection? Like, they can't get the drugs, they can't get qualified medical professionals to do this. They can't get access to the veins. These people have terrible veins. I document they broke state laws. They broke federal laws. They falsified prescriptions. Literally, there's stories of, this is Idaho. They took $15,000 in cash in a suitcase and chartered a private plane to do an under-the-table drug deal in Spokane, allegedly in a Walmart parking lot. And when the thing broke after a FOIA request, the state came out and said it was not in a Walmart parking lot.
It was Target.
I was like, what?
It was
That's your problem?
Target. Yeah, we're fancier than Walmart.
But it's, it costs so much money. Arizona spent $1.5 million on drugs for 3 executions and botched all 3. And it's not even humane. So it's, they're pushing this huge rock of Sisyphus uphill. Why? I just don't even get it. And what I came to, the only conclusion I can come to is that lethal injection just does one thing well. only one thing, and that is it hides state violence. It allows us to say
perception
they're just falling into forever sleep, which is kind of the death we all want, right? Like, I'd go to sleep. I mean, when it's my time, right? Just kind of fall to sleep. And so I think it's out of sight, out of mind.
Are there advocate groups out there fighting for, if you want to still do lethal injections, do it in a more humane way? Let's look at the compounds. Let's look at these 3 drugs. Let's reconsider. Do we have groups out there?
Well, there's certainly no PAC for condemned murderers. You've got the capital defense attorneys that are doing the lethal injection litigation.
ACLU and how involved are they?
You know, the ACLU has a death penalty project.
Yes.
I know those folks because one of them was my conversation partner when I went through North Carolina. And so they are doing some lethal injection litigation, but I think a lot of that, unless they are directly representing the person in a Section 1983 suit, you're not going to see that. And on the other hand, you have newspapers and media associations, because let me tell you, another piece of this, I mean, the reason the book is called Secrets of the Killing State is because it's secret. Like, everything's covered. And so, here's just an example. In Missouri, they, found out that there was a doctor. I mean, a lot of times there isn't, but there was here. They only found out because he was using half the dose of the first drug, which is the one that's supposed to be the anesthetic. So they had litigated this thing, and the court said, yes, you can use 5 grams of this drug. And the capital defense attorneys looked at the execution logs for the past 3 or 4 and said, you're using 2.5. The state comes in and says, no, the logs are wrong. We were authorized. We would never violate the protocol. We would never violate the court order. The court has said 5. We did 5. We're trying to figure out why. We'll be back in a minute. We're going to figure out why these logs are wrong. And they have to come back the next day and say, so the logs are right. And we've been executing these people with half of the amount of the anesthetic, and we're trying to figure that out. The capital defense attorney says to the judge, I want a limited deposition. Like, yeah, we'll do it behind a veil. I don't need to know their identity, but you're using half the dose on several of these, and these are torturous deaths under a paralytic. I get to ask him questions. And the judge said, yeah, you sure do. So they get this guy, and they find out he's a doctor, and they're like, so why are you using half the dose? And he says, I'm dyslexic, and sometimes I mix up numbers. So sometimes I make mistakes. So the capital defense attorneys are like, what? And say, we don't want him used. The state doubles down on him. He's great. Don't even, he's good. The judge is like, no, you can't use him at all. The state appeals it. This is the state of Missouri. It goes up on appeal, and at oral arguments, my sense is they got stung because right after oral arguments, they were like, never mind, we won't use him anymore. But this whole thing got the attention of investigative journalists, and they're like, who is this doctor that is dyslexic? And they start looking around the records and all of this, and they find out his identity. And he ends up saying, that's right. And no one will ever do as many as I did. He did like 56 executions. And it turns out he had been sued for malpractice over 20 times, had his hospital
in
privileges.
Relation to the executions or just separate?
Separate apart.
Separate.
Wow.
Separate.
Okay.
Had his hospital privileges revoked at 2 hospitals, had been censured by the medical. And here's my answer to the question. After all of that, what did the Missouri legislature do? The very next session, they passed a secrecy law that said it is unlawful for you to report the identity of a current or former executioner. And you will be subject to treble damages if you violate this. So their answer to this embarrassing find by investigative journalists is, we're just going to make it unlawful for the journalists to report on this. And so this whole thing is covered by secrecy, by layers of secrecy that I think, in a representative democracy, we would not have that. How can the people be talking about this and be even, how can you say that people support the death penalty when they have no idea what this thing really looks like or how it works?
And it seems like there should be an easy fix to it, right? You would think.
Yeah, you just go see the vet. They got stuff, right? I mean,
they're putting out.
I think it's more complicated than that, because the drug suppliers and some states have gone to the one drug pentobarbital protocol, which is what we use on pets. Some states have gone that. A lot of them haven't. They love that paralytic so very much. But, some states have gone to the one drug protocol. Thing is, the drug suppliers, they're like,
don't want to be associated.
I don't want you, and a nice example is Pfizer. Life is our life's work. And so they're like, using our drugs to cause people to promptly die is not what we want. And, as I say in the book, you might be like, well, I don't trust you, Big Pharma, and I don't think you really do care. But they've been sued when their drugs have been used in a botched execution. Mylan had, I think, $50 million divested from them because they didn't have controls on their products. So, even if you think it's just the bottom line,
sure.
The bottom line is the vets get the drugs, executioners do not.
So where does that leave us then? Like, are states doubling down, continuing to do this? Is there talk about reform, about changing this? And now we're not even talking about whether the death penalty should exist or not. We're just talking about the manner in which it's done.
And why isn't there more legislation being passed to control it?
Yeah. So I have a whole chapter talking about that and the non-delegation doctrine, because the legislatures, for their part, are passing these lethal injection statutes that just say, they'll say like death by lethal injection or death by a combination of chemicals to bring death. And so the legislators get the bump of like, see, we're civilized. We're doing this in this really peaceful manner.
The devil's in the details. It's in the actual implementation.
It sure as heck is. And then it goes down to the DOCs, the Departments of Correction, and they're like, I don't know how to do this. And so one of my opening chapters is Oklahoma. How did they choose midazolam? Midazolam is Versed. It's a sedative. The anesthesiologists call it a martini in a syringe. It's not an anesthetic. Does not do that. And it's like, how did you choose? Well, I documented it. The lawyer for the Department of Corrections Googled it. And he said, yeah, I looked online. I went past the WikiLeaks or whatever it's called. That literally happened. Like, that's what's happening. So, the legislature, I think, gets all of the benefit from just passing the statutes. And then when it causes trouble, they pass a secrecy statute to cover their tracks. Whole thing is buried. And most people aren't caring or paying attention to what we're doing or how these, murderers die. So, we'll just kind of cover it with secrecy. What's the answer? I just did an interview last week with a Florida reporter, and she was like, well, then how should we kill? And, my answer is always, that is not my project.
Is there a good way to kill? That's the question.
That's
there
not
isn't a
my
good way to
project.
kill.
And here's the thing. So I wish I had put this in the book. I didn't. But here's a little thing that I wish I had.
Book number 2?
No. I think not. But
ChatGPT makes writing a lot easier.
Yeah, I'm sure. But I'm afraid of the hallucinations that would come out of this thing. But, one of the doctors had said, remember, the heart stops reluctantly. The heart stops reluctantly. And what he was talking about is to bring death before the body is ready to go requires violence. The heart stops reluctantly. The heart will keep wanting to beat until the body's like, okay, we're out, we're done. And so it takes force to stop the heart. It takes violence. It could be a car accident. It could be a homicide. It could be an execution, but it takes force. It takes violence to stop the heart from beating before it's ready to stop on its own. And what is special about lethal injection is it is the only method that hides the violence. It internalizes the violence under a chemical veneer. That's what makes it special. That's why they're sticking with it like glue, despite the fact that it's so hard for them. It's so, bad in so many ways. And they're like, yeah, but it's better than firing squad, which shows, South Carolina just did a couple executions by firing squad. Electric chair, these are pretty gruesome deaths that show the violence. And then people start paying attention to that sort of thing and start talking about brutality. And I don't know, I'm always like, if you don't like the state shedding blood in your name, I got news for you. That's what the death penalty is.
So the Secrets of the Killing State spotlighted that violence that many can't see.
Uncovered. Yeah.
Uncovered it.
How has it been received?
Surprisingly well. I've had a number of reviews of it, and they're all positive. There's only one bad review that came out, and I actually quite liked it. The review said she had so much potential. She could, she didn't talk about racism. She didn't talk about actual innocence. She didn't talk about, errors and all of these other things. And what I loved about that bad review, and so it was a disappointment to the person. What I loved about it is, yeah, but you did, right? And my book, it could have been a tome on the whole death penalty. It would have been 10 volumes. And also, I wanted to write it for everyone. If you're a death penalty supporter, I want to say to you, this is, and I say it in the first pages of the book. Listen, I'm going to be super clear about this. This is a book about how we kill, not whether we should kill. It's not that I don't have my own views. It's not that the two aren't related, but this is a focused discussion on this piece that we haven't had. And
you're not arguing a point of view in the book. You talked about bringing the receipts and
I brought the receipts.
You brought the receipts.
I did bring the receipts, indeed.
And those receipts are years of work to look into executions throughout the country and then uncover that violence that has been hidden. And it's mind-boggling to even think that it's still being hidden today as we speak.
We love to end with this question.
Oh.
If you could go back to when you started your career, knowing everything that you know now, what advice would you give yourself?
If I could go back, what advice would I give myself? I mean, I kind of think I took this advice, but like the advice I would give anyone would be to say yes. Like, say yes and follow things where they lead. And maybe this is because I'm in a law school, and so I see so many students and they're trying to figure it out. And a law degree is basically, a souped up liberal arts degree that is like 8 different professions, right? Criminal law is nothing like real estate, is nothing like environmental, is nothing like family law. It feels like a bunch of different professions. And so they're trying to find their way. And I always feel that somewhere inside us, in our souls, is sort of this little homing pigeon that will find its way if you just start saying yes. You'll meet the people that are your people eventually, and it'll help you. Like, yeah, I didn't really like that, or I didn't really like, that's not my vibe. Okay, great. Like, it just, I would just say yes. And in some ways, that's how I got to University of Richmond. I was a prosecutor in Henrico and got a call. Would you teach trial ad? And I said yes. And then I was like, I really want to be one of these professors. I think I'm just going to write a paper and go out on the market and do it.
Professor Lain, you've led the way. And I say that because I often fish for compliments from my students. And I'm like, well, who's your favorite professor? And of course, I hope that they would say Professor Abuzaki, but I'm always second to Professor Lain. And then I'm like, okay, so second, you are loved by your students.
Aw.
And you've taught so many great minds. And you probably will never appreciate how many minds you've molded over your career. And you will never appreciate it.
Don't make me cry.
But it's important to look back at the hundreds of students, if not actually thousands of students, that have taken your class and that have sat there and taken everything you've taught them as gospel and then went out in the real world with the human that you are and the philosophy on life that you have and on justice, and have taken that and now are effectuating it into practice. So your book is there and it's going to be there forever, but your teachings are going to live on way beyond the books. No one needs to read the book to know who Professor Lain is. So thank you. We appreciate you so greatly.
Thank you.
And we're looking forward to continuing this conversation. Hopefully, many states will do right for those that they execute in the future.
Thank you.
It was such an honor to be here with both of you. I think we could have gone on for hours. And
We can, for sure. No question about it.
I'm really, 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 it's been an honor. Thank you. Seriously. Yeah, it's an honor.
It's a mutual feeling.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Courtroom Stories and Tactics by RVA Trial Lawyers. Hosted by Sharif Gray and Niall Abuzaki. Please subscribe and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or any major podcast platform. Together, we're building a tribe of trial lawyers to remind the world what human life is truly worth, one verdict at a time.